All right, hello everyone. My name is Demi and I am here to welcome you to tonight's event. Throughout our ongoing partnership with the Kamloops Society for the Written Arts, we have been hosting virtual events for readers and writers every week this summer, and we will continue to do that into the fall. Tonight we welcome Janet from the Kamloops Society for the Written Arts as our guest host and Geoff Strong as our guest author. I have a couple of quick announcements just before we get started. If you can't stay for the whole event, that's not a problem. After it's over, there will be a recording available on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. If you have joined us on Zoom, your video and microphone will remain off throughout tonight's event. And if you are watching the event on Facebook Live, feel free to type any questions you have into the comment section of the video. I'll be monitoring this and we'll make sure that Geoff gets your questions for the Q&A period. And if you are on Zoom, you can also type any questions you have in the chat area. All right, I will turn things over to Janet now.
Okay, hello. Welcome everyone to tonight's author talk, brought to you by the Thompson-Nicola Regional Library and the Kamloops Society of the Written Arts. My name's Janet. I'm the one you're looking at that says KSWA, Kamloops Society of the Written Arts. A video isn't working here for me. But I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Chedabucto people. And like I said, my name is Janet. I'm a board member of the Kamloops Society of the Written Arts. I'm pleased to host our author talk with Geoff Strong, an author who's truly used both science and fiction to create awareness of, very concerning environmental issues. I've had a chance to begin reading his book, Inconvenient Mistruth, and I've been so drawn in, I'm stopping reading my other book midstream, which is really unusual for me, but it's a very intriguing book. Geoff will be speaking for approximately 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have a question and answer period of 20 to 30 minutes from both Zoom and Facebook Live. And to introduce Geoff, I'm going to share his biography. Geoff's an atmospheric and climate scientist by profession who retired from Environment Canada in 1998. He's a fellow of and former national president of the Canadian Meteorological and Oceanographic Society, and has received several awards from that society. He devotes time to providing public education on climate change through media articles and invited talks, and by teaching environmental courses through universities and local organizations. More recently, Geoff expanded his writings to include fictional novels on climate change, which also provide accurate information on the science without detracting from a very interesting story. So his published novels include Convenient Mistruth from 2017 and Inconvenient Pipeline, which was just published. And the Inconvenient Pipeline, for the locals, is centered on the town of Merritt, BC. And so I'd like to say welcome, Geoff, and you're ready to go.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet and Demi, and thanks to the Thompson-Nicola Regional Library and Catherine Schmidt, the Coordinator of Adult Services, for arranging this event. Very special thanks and welcome to those people tuning in tonight via either Zoom or Facebook. And by the way, someone might check on that. The Facebook version of it is not on yet. I suppose there's supposed to be a delay, but anyway, I'm glad you're all here because no author can survive writing without those who may read his book. And this event replaces my being in Merritt today, where my wife and I spent some time in 2018 and 19 doing my research of the area and the people for this novel. My original plan was to have an in-person book launch at Merritt Library during the summer of 2020, or as soon as I had printed copies. But of course, COVID-19 changed all of that for all of us, even though I published this novel on time in June. However, many of us are adapting to these virtual meetings now. I do 2 or 3 a week, it seems, and especially for scientific conferences and church services. And it does have potential for more people to participate. from both within and outside of Merritt. So it's worth trying. So this evening I plan for the first 20 minutes to explain some science background on climate change and pipelines to introduce the topic, after which I'll take about 10 minutes to read a few short excerpts from the novel. And following that, we want to open up the meeting to you folks with a 20 to 30 minute Q&A session. For those not familiar with Zoom, down at the bottom of the screen, you will see a tab labeled chat. And if you think of a question or of a comment you wish to make at any point here, you can hit the chat button. And please, it would be helpful to me if you input your name, location, plus an email address if you would like a response to your question or comment. Alternatively, you can jot down your comment and ask it live afterward. And for those relegated to listening by a Facebook page, feel free to send me an email with any of your comments or suggestions. All right, so the title of this short talk is Climate Change Causes and Threats. And the picture there is the melting Greenland ice sheet. And this ice sheet is melting at an unprecedented rate, far faster than climate models predicted about 10 years ago. And that's the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is notoriously conservative. And you can find real-time videos of this online on YouTube if you're interested. Bill McKibben about 12 years ago wrote, "It's not that climate scientists are alarmist, it's more that the science is very alarming." And that's actually more true today than it was even a dozen years ago. When we look at the trend of atmospheric carbon dioxide, increasing carbon dioxide from excessive burning of fossil fuels is causing climate warming. I prefer to call it global warming a lot of the time, or even global climate crisis. And I know a lot of people don't like graphs, but for a scientist, it allows them to present a lot of data in one picture. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but to a scientist is worth 10,000 pieces of data. So there we have on the bottom from 1960 to 2020, and along the axis here is the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide. And so 400 parts per million just simply means if you had a volume of air that had 1,000 molecules of air, sorry, 1 million molecules of air in it, 400 of them would be carbon dioxide. Okay, and the theory was proven mathematically and physically by Swedish scientist Savant Arrhenius in 1896. So we don't talk of climate change as a theory, it's proven fact. And don't let anyone else tell you different. If you recall the 2015 Paris Global Agreement to try and limit global warming to 2 degrees, but to aim for 1.5 degrees. Here's 2015. Those government leaders and premiers and prime ministers and presidents and everything went home after promising they would see reduction of carbon emissions. And they came out a few years later saying, we've reduced emissions in the last 5 years, but they're either lying or they don't know what they're talking about, because the nature doesn't lie. And of course, the trend has continued in there. Okay, and in June the 1st, we hit the highest all-time value of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, over 418 parts per million. And by next year, in May, you'll see it over 420, almost guaranteed. The global temperature anomalies are showing a similar trend. If we go back to the CO2 started in 1957, and we have a similar trend in the mean global temperature. I've added in for this year, I'm guessing at 1.4, it'll be awfully close to that by the end of the year. We will exceed the warmest ever global mean temperature, which was in 2016. It's going to exceed it this year, almost for certain. And global warming we experience today is mostly from carbon emissions of the past 50 years. So if you look back at this thing, that means somewhere back in here, if we stopped all emissions today, we still have this to account for, and global warming would continue for decades to come. So not only will we not limit it to 1.5 degrees, or highly unlikely to be able to limit it to 2 degrees. Besides, we haven't even started at anything yet. So I like to talk about the impacts that have occurred from global warming up to date with that degree of warming. And if you look at the mid-latitudes, can you see my cursor on this? Does it show up? Oh, you're off, so you can't tell me. Of course, the mid-latitudes, industrial countries, are pretty well responsible for almost all of the carbon emissions and therefore global warming. However, it's the Arctic and subtropical regions that are suffering the most for it. And they're also least responsible for the cause, the excess carbon emissions, which raises a question of ethics. And the question of ethics here is enough reason in itself for why industrial countries, and especially Canada and the US, should be increasing aid to developing countries, especially in the subtropics. So now let's just examine one or two of the impacts from each of these two major regions, the Arctic and the subtropics, and see what we have here. And I usually hit upon melting permafrost in northern regions with the release of methane, because here's a picture of a tundra area where the permafrost has melted, and now it exposes all of these peat moss bogs that cover a large part of the northern regions. And as soon as they're exposed, of course, they start decomposing, releasing carbon dioxide and methane, depending on whether they're in dry conditions or wet conditions. And I would tell you that methane is 82 times more a potent greenhouse gas warmer than carbon dioxide is. So it has the potential to increase global warming to disaster proportions. The only thing we got going for is that methane in general is 2 orders of magnitude less in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide, but increasing more rapidly than carbon dioxide. Here's a permafrost collapse near Aklavik in Northwest Territories that I've come across. And this was originally a pond in here, but with permafrost melt, the water found a way out to break through the ice after it melted, and the pond flushes out in a matter of hours. And that's happening all over the northern regions of Alaska, Northwest Territories, and Siberia. There's another pond here, which is about to go the same way, and 2 or 3 months later, different perspective in this aerial photo, indeed it broke through, and you can see it's been flushing the water out, gone downstream, it goes into the Mackenzie River, and exposing the peat bogs that are there. So, just a second here. I think I may have missed something. No, okay. So let's go to the subtropics, and there the most serious impact of global warming is desertification and drought. All of the world's great deserts are in the subtropics. The Sahara, the Arabian, just to the east of that. In southern Africa, we have the Kalahari and Namibian. And if you go to Australia, they have the Great Australian Desert. And all of these are smack in the middle of the subtropics. And it just happens that agricultural regions in the subtropics tend to border the deserts, because if you go further away from it, you get into equatorial rainforest where you can't grow crops. So those deserts are expanding with global warming, at least they're believed to be. And the Sahara, for example, is expanding at a rate of meters per every day for the last 20, 30 years. So in South Sudan in 2017, you see women collecting water from an ever decreasing source, and they're lining up all their buckets. Notice they're all women. In Africa, men don't do work. It's the women that do all the work. I see in the background there, to me, I'm not certain on this picture, but I'm pretty sure that's a climate refugee camp that's in there. So people from the north having come down because they can't live there anymore. And in Western Tanzania, the same year, 2017, you can see that the results of the drought there with farm animals, cattle that have died from lack of water. Likewise, a little bit further south in Zimbabwe, a watering hole for wildlife, and you see elephants dying from lack of water. Go across the equator into Australia, and they've had the same thing, at least the last couple of years, severe drought where farmers can't or don't have enough water for their cattle, or else they're out on the range and they die of water because their watering holes have dried up. And we saw late last year and early this year, the drought in Australia was causing amazing big wildfires. At one time, it looked like all of Australia was on fire. So that's the sort of thing that's happening. Now, just an aside here, one of the other jobs I do is as a volunteer I'm the diocesan representative for the Anglican Primates World Relief and Development Fund on Vancouver Island. And I go around to various parishes and talk about PWRDF, the work that it's doing throughout the world and also in Canada with First Nations, and encourage them to give to this very worthy cause. In fact, I often tell people PWRDF is the primary reason, or one of two reasons, why I'm an Anglican. The other being my wife, who's sitting beside me here. You can't see her, and she insists that I be Anglican. Anyway, that's aside. But a lot of the problems, a lot of our NGO money that goes to developing countries is going to the subtropics, and they're having increasing difficulty in just keeping up with the disasters from global warming. The northern methane problem that I just spoke of and subtropical desertification really prompted my first novel, Convenient Mistruths. It's centered, most of the novel takes place in the Northwest Territories and the Yukon. So I just thought I'd throw that in. And many impacts of global warming, such as the melting of the Greenland ice sheet you saw on the first slide, have accelerated in recent years, particularly in the last couple or 3 years. And we should be asking the question, why? And it's a good question. And one of the reasons is because positive feedback loops to the climate are starting to synchronize together. These positive feedback loops intensify the global warming that caused them and cause more global warming. And those feedbacks could yet result in worst case climate modeling scenarios coming to fruition in the future. So what are these positive feedback loops? And let me give you quickly a few examples. I'll just list them. One is increased global temperatures. Water vapor is controlled, it's capped by the temperature of the air. And so nature will evaporate water until it reaches saturation, which is at that temperature. And then it forms cloud, precipitation, and it falls to the ground and restores some equilibrium. But by increasing global temperatures, of course, we're raising the potential for water vapor. We're actually increasing it in the air. We don't talk much about that. They tend to focus on temperatures. So there's more water vapor in the air, and I'll remind you that water vapor is the most potent greenhouse gas. So you're contributing to more global warming, which raises the temperature further, which allows more water vapor, which contributes to more global warming, and so on. Okay, melting ice from Arctic land and sea surfaces start showing up more dark surfaces, which absorb more incoming solar radiation. And the melting permafrost and release of methane that I just spoke about. The warming Arctic Ocean. This one is a lot of question marks behind this, but we know there are a lot of offshore methane clathrates lying on the continental shelf around the Arctic Ocean. And once you clear off the ice, then the water can start to warm up and a possible release of methane from that. Methane, when it's caught in snow and ice, is actually at the molecular level trapped within the ice molecule. And it can stay there for hundreds of thousands of years until the ice melts, and then the methane is immediately released. And others are rainforest drought. Trees, of course, absorb carbon dioxide from the air for photosynthesis and providing us in return food and oxygen that we breathe. That's why I don't like people to call carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases, greenhouse pollutants. Don't use that word around me. And if the trees die, then of course you're losing that carbon sink, and you're providing increased potential for forest fires, which releases more carbon dioxide. And in the equatorial rainforest, particularly Brazil, of course, they're clearing off the forests and burning them for more agricultural land. And all of that contributes to an increase in global warming. Methane release from wetlands and from oil and gas fracking. I don't think we heard much about fracking, maybe as little as 15 years ago. Now it's very important. And in the US, in Texas and Oklahoma, it has moved the US from being an oil importer to being an oil exporter. And it releases a tremendous amount of methane. And then there's rising sea surface temperatures from global warming. Most of the heat that goes into the atmosphere eventually winds up in the oceans, about 90% of it or more. So if we stopped all emissions today, well, now that warmer ocean will start putting more heat into the atmosphere, contributing to global warming. So all of these positive feedbacks, where there were only a few of them maybe 10, 15 years ago, have now all become active, and they're synchronized, which is helping, in my view, to accelerate global warming. I'm sticking with that thought anyway. Okay, some of the risks from pipelines, because I want to get to the novel. And first of all, for natural gas, and I got something in place of my, so there's the explosion and fire risk, particularly in cities where they have gas lines, and that also releases methane. For crude oil, there's a short-term risk with the pipeline on land, because it can pollute soil and water that it causes, and in the longer term cause harm to human health, water, fish, wildlife, and the environment, of course. But the greater risk from the perspective of British Columbia occurs when the oil leaves the pipeline at Burnaby and pumped into waiting tanker ships. And let me give you an example, because when I was a young forecaster in 1970, I was pulled off the forecast deck and sent up to Chedabucto Bay to work out of an old army truck as part of the cleanup team for the SSRO crude oil spill. Close that door. And about it grounded on rock, Cerebus rock in Chedabucto Bay. It's still there, although in two halves. It still sits on that rock. And about a third of its 16,000 tons or 10 million liters of bunker C oil spilled into the bay. And they managed to pump out about 6 million liters from its tanks, but 4 million liters spilled. And 50 years later, today, oil still remains on 300 kilometers of coastline, and parts of the bay are still closed to fishing and tourism because of that. Oil cleanups on water are never more than 10% successful. And the cleanup costs are always borne by governments and taxpayers. What I mean is that, for example, the SS Arrow was actually owned by Aristotle Onassis in Greece, but it was registered in Liberia. We couldn't touch them. Whereas the oil was owned by Imperial Oil, they purchased it, but they're saying, oh, it's not our ship. We didn't cause the accident. And so, of course, it's always governments and taxpayers that pay the bill. And that should change immediately, especially with the Trans Mountain Pipeline coming up. Just one other aspect about that. And my mind just went blank. That happens frequently. Okay, I'll just go on. Okay, so this is the novel we're talking about. It's a prequel to Convenient Mistruths. That is, it occurs 12 years earlier. Most of it, as Janet said earlier, occurs in the Merritt area. The issues are the environmental risk for British Columbia and First Nations. And the main heroes are Julia. She's 13 years old and the daughter of Eric and Carol Nicholson, who seems to thrive at solving little mysteries we find in the novel. And she makes a friend from the Coldwater band, Leah, who becomes a lifelong friend as well after, and together they solve an important problem. Target audience for the novel is youth 13 to 30. It's an illustrated novel because it has been anyone who likes a good, clean story without too much technical detail in it can enjoy it. And it has no sex in it. Thought I'd throw that in. My wife will crack me over the head for saying that. Whoops, sorry. Other targets are environmental organizations, First Nations, of course, and schools. When I get a chance, every now and then I get invited to give talks in schools. It's published by Climate Crisis 2020. Actually, that's me, that's my publishing thing. I have a contract with Ingram Spark, who are all over the world. Within a day of signing the contract with them, they had it online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Indigo chapters, and however many there are around the world, I don't know. There's my contact email address, by the way. So one last slide before we get to the novel, and I'll just show you definitive proof of global warming. And I thought I would update that to more modern times, so I did a bit of editing on it, and now all you see is the clothespins. So thank you, and all questions and comments are welcome, but I would suggest you put it into the chat if you're on, or write it down. You can also email me questions if you like. My website, it's by the same name as the publishing. It's still under construction, but it is available, and I'm still working on it. Lots of work to do on my Facebook page. We're almost daily, I update that with information on either pollution or climate change, the COVID, and that horrible election that's coming up across the border down there. All right, so I'm going to go now then to the novel. Is that okay? And you can't, since you're all on mute, you can't argue with me, so. And I'd like to read just a few sections to give you the flavor of the story, after which we'll open up to your questions and or comments, and you'll get unmuted, I believe, for that. First of all, the characters in the novel, which are the same family that appeared in the earlier novel, except this is a prequel, as I said. And the parents are Eric Nicholson, who's a climate scientist at the fictitious University of Vancouver, not UBC, and his wife Carol, who is a senior meteorologist and weather forecaster with Environment Canada. And they come into the story as well, of course. The children are John, presently 9 years old. He doesn't have too big a role in this novel, but he does in later stories. And then our heroine, Julia, 13, I was inspired here by Greta Thunberg with this one, so. And Julia has a talent for solving little mysteries. She meets a friend partway through, Leah, from the Coldwater Band in Merritt, and together they uncover some corporate deception by the petroleum industry that adults fail to recognize, which underscores the leadership of today's young climate activists, with which I am very impressed. Another member of the family is Buddy, a golden retriever. I won't describe the other characters just now. In the introduction, I mentioned how my wife and I were in a tiny little thrift shop in Courtenay on the island one day a couple of years ago, where I found an interesting little box with two symbols engraved in the cover, a rearing horse and a key. And the symbols intrigued me, and I still haven't figured out what they represented originally. But without thinking further on it, I decided right then and there that this box would command the focus in my novel, which I had only written a couple of chapters at that point. So here is that box here. Can you see it? And there's the, there's the, I mentioned, those are inlaid into the wood of the, so a key and a rearing horse, a stallion, I guess. So I'll leave you puzzled about that for now, although in the story, Julia does figure out the symbols. The setting is mostly in Merritt, a town of about 7,500 population in south central BC, along the Coquihalla Highway, partway, well, about an hour's drive south of Kamloops. And the story starts in Vancouver, where the Nicholson family live and work. I'm just checking on something here. Okay. And I'm going to start right on page 1 of the novel, for it gives a forewarning of everything to come. So here we go. Dad, oil is leaking from that tanker, Julia yelled. Julia and her dad, Eric Nicholson, had launched their canoe at Vanier Park boat dock near the museum in Vancouver, and then paddled along the west shore of Stanley Park. They were trying out her new 13-foot Kodiak canoe, which she wanted to use that summer when they went to Merritt on a warm Saturday in early May. Which tanker, Julia? Her dad asked, for there were 3 tanker ships visible ahead on Burrard Inlet. The red one on the right. There appears to be oil pouring off the stern. Yes, I see it now, but no one on board seems concerned about it. They haven't noticed a leak yet. We need to call harbor security people so they can warn the tanker, which they did. They pulled into shore and he pulled out his phone and phoned them, and they were very appreciative of it. And there's a whole chapter that follows where they have a celebration for Julia for having noticed that and warned harbor security. But we jump over to page 3 here anyway. They resumed their paddling, and Julia remarked, I guess that's one reason why many people oppose the proposed pipeline from Alberta. However, our teacher said that some First Nations bands favor the pipeline. Why is that, Dad? Well, the pipeline is an opportunity for some people, but it's an inconvenient pipeline for others. And as they headed south along the shore towards Falls Creek, where they had launched a few hours earlier, Eric added, the pipeline can entice some people to find a good paying job while it is being built, but most of those jobs disappear once they complete the pipeline. And that comes into the story later as well. So then in early July, the family started out for a 2-week vacation of camping, canoeing, and fishing around Merritt. They chose Merritt for it has around it 2 salmon rivers that meander through the town, providing ready fishing and canoeing opportunities. It also happens to be where the Trans Mountain Pipeline crosses the river, but that's not why they went there. They're faced with the first mystery on the first day in Merritt, when John and Julia discover an oil leak on the Nicola River during their first canoe run with their dad. While checking that out, Julia also discovers the little wooden box, which I showed you earlier. They notify the regional field manager for the pipeline company in Kamloops, who comes down to Merritt, and together they inspect the oil leak right where the pipeline crosses the Nicola River. And the following morning, the family is downtown Merritt picking up supplies at the supermarket. And Julia and John notice a small dog in the parking lot, and we pick up the story again from there. The dog approached the children and licked their hands. Julia checked the dog's collar and found a tag showing its name as Denny. Eric suggested that they take the dog to the nearby RCMP detachment, since they were going there anyway to give statements on the oil leak. They drove to the detachment along Boat Street and went inside with the dog in tow on Buddy's spare leash. And that little dog is another mystery that Julia solves later. Eric spoke to a constable at the desk. We're here to see Constable McTavish about the oil leak we discovered near the pipeline yesterday. And meanwhile, pointing to the kids who have Denny on a walking leash, do you have any information on this little lost dog? Yes, I'm Constable McTavish. I spoke to you this morning by phone, and I see you found Denny. You're familiar with him then? Oh, yes, said the officer. I see Denny's gotten loose again. Grandma Jane Osgood looks after him. She used to run Grandma Jane's dog rescue organization. She's retired now, but still takes in stray dogs that we find. Well, the next day they're visiting a ranch owned by the family of the Coldwater Band, and Julia wants to return the little box she found, having correctly guessed what the 2 symbols on the cover represented. After contacting the rancher, they found out that the box belongs to his 10-year-old daughter, Jenny. It was made for her by her grandfather. And we pick up the story at this ranch. While the adults had coffee, the 4 children drank lemonade and talked among themselves. Julia brought out the little box belonging to Jenny and passed it over to her. Here you go, Jenny. All it contained was your little map. I can show you the map. This is the map she's talking about. I don't know if you can see it, but down at the bottom, there's something marked treasure. So, was there anything else in the box when you lost it? No, that's all. I noticed you wrote treasure on a spot on your map. Yes, it is buried treasure, for me anyway. Would you like to see my treasure place? Sure, said Julia and John together. Well, come on, I'll show you. And the discovery of the treasure is an eye-opener for all of them, and Julia solves one more little mystery, but others are to follow. There are a series of other events, all of which involve the Coldwater and Nicola First Nations bands and the regional field manager for the pipeline company, who eventually has a turnaround in his career. Most events in the novel involve some additional problem for Julia to resolve, and the events are not always pleasant. One morning, Eric and Julia were walking Buddy down along the Coldwater River, as Buddy, like all golden retrievers, loved to retrieve sticks and race back and forth. This incident, although initially unpleasant, led to a prodigal homecoming. So I pick it up there again. After one such run, Julia was surprised to see Buddy down on the riverbank alongside somebody sitting there. The person was motionless, and Buddy walked up to him and started licking his face. Uh-oh, Buddy, come, she yelled. And Eric pulled out a whistle and blew 2 shorts and a long, which, as always, caused Buddy to whip around and dash back to them. Julia slipped Buddy's leather choke collar over his head. The person still had not moved. We should check on that person, Dad. Maybe he's injured or even dead. You're right, Julia. You stay here a few moments while I check on him. Eric spoke up while approaching and asked, Are you okay there? A young man in his late teens turned to Eric, pointing a revolver in his direction and said, No, I'm not okay at all, so leave me alone. Anyway, following their 2-week vacation, we've left out a bit there, they'd had far more excitement and enjoyment than they had ever intended, but in the process developed some lifelong friendships. They head home, and it appears that the end of the story is near, until a major environmental disaster occurs without warning. And I leave that disaster for your own reading experience. So now I'm finished with that part, and I'd like to open this up for comments or questions on either the earlier presentation or on the novel. And I'll turn control, I guess, back now to our host. Is that...
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you, Geoff. That was the most concise and effective information I've seen on what's going on in our environment. I learned so much, and I appreciate that. I'm also love how you left us hanging with the book, so we've got to go get it. Just so you know, the Facebook Live did not work, but it is being recorded and it will be shared on Facebook. And everyone that's here, if you see it and want to share it as well, it's interesting because our author talks after the fact, get a lot of views from the Facebook Live. So we won't be able to get questions from those people right now. And I'm thinking maybe what we'll do, because there aren't too many of us to manage this, I'll just unmute everybody. And if you do want to mute yourself, you're welcome to. And just kind of give us a wave and for your question, and we'll be good. So we'll try this. Sort of. So we have a few of you that are unmuted. Yeah. Does anyone have a question they'd like to start with?
They could also start their video up down in the lower left corner there too, if they want.
Yes, please do. Mm. There's a very good question from Mary Ellen. What do we do differently? Climate change has been in the news for so long, and no changes have happened yet. And I think if I were going to ask a question, that would be the one.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
Mhm.
That the question?
That's the question from
Oh.
Mary Ellen.
Yeah, and she's basically right. From my perspective, no significant changes have happened yet. You see that in the atmospheric carbon dioxide. Industry and government keep telling us they're doing this and doing that, but it really, the efforts are basically ineffective. I'm sure there are some countries, particularly in Europe, where they are following the agreement they signed in Paris in 2015, but we're certainly not doing much here in Canada. And of course, come last January, February, everything got stymied by COVID, and there's been very little talk of climate since then, which bothers me because that crisis hasn't stopped, and it's bound to be a more serious crisis than COVID-19 in the long run. So we need to press government whenever you can that we need action on climate change, and we need significant action now.
Hey, thank you, Geoff. We're wondering if what works best. If people want to just put their questions in the chat and keep themselves muted, they can. If someone's unmuted right now and has a question, please go ahead.
I can ask a question. If everyone can hear me.
I can barely hear you, but go ahead, Will.
Okay, I'll get closer to the microphone, which is on the laptop. It's really good to see you, Geoff. Can you hear me a little bit, Geoff?
Pardon?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry if I'm getting really close to my laptop microphone, but thank you to the Thompson-Nicola Library. I think you're in Kamloops and hosting this. What a fantastic thing. And I know Geoff through PWRDF that Geoff has mentioned. He's a great volunteer and supporter for all of our work, including our work together in climate action. Hey, Geoff, just a question. Hey, you've shown us some slides as an atmospheric scientist, a lot of detailed work. And then you have a novel that is geared towards young people. And I'm just wondering how you as a writer and a teacher, how do you balance that? Do you write your novels in the morning and you write your PowerPoints and your teaching materials in the afternoon, or do you just take turns? How do you do that? Because it seems kind of complex to be able to do both.
Yeah, sometimes it's like that. You can appreciate too that for 50 years I was writing scientific articles, I had journal articles, and doing a novel is a totally different ballgame, especially dialogue. But I got used to it. I still don't know to this day if those novels are effective or not. So I'm not sure I can answer your question, but I have done lots of public talks on climate, and you try to bring it down to the level, most of it anyway, that people can understand. And the reason I was doing it is because climate scientists in general don't talk to the public. They're too busy writing their articles and talking with other scientists. And I think that's sad in a way, because it allowed climate denialists had the whole of media available to them, and caused all kinds of problems there in the last 30 years with denying climate change, even though it was proven over 100 years ago. But so you try to bring it down to that level. That's sometimes it's difficult, and I stumble over it sometimes.
And I do think it was really brave to take this topic and turn it into a story, a fictional story. But I also think fictional stories are sometimes the best way for people to really hear. So I'm really appreciative of how you've done or shared your work. Do we have other questions? Just for you, Geoff, Ian Rutherford message, I'm not sure if you're seeing it, good presentation. Geoff, his computer has no audio, so he ended up dropping off. So other questions, Mark?
Yes, thank you. reflecting back to the previous question about, you know, are there any effects or changes in the last year, and are we getting anywhere? One of the things that I've kind of reflected on a bit is over the many years, the argument has been that it's too expensive to change. It's too difficult to change from a fossil fuel industry back or livelihood, if you like, to non-fossil fuels. And then we got slapped with COVID, and it was remarkable to me how quickly things were paid for, shut down, closed up. Major changes to our so-called economy and all of the things that we as human beings kind of hold as unchangeable were affected. Now, I don't know if, I doubt that politicians have got the message or people have got the message, but it does go to show you that if we actually got down to deciding as a society to change, that it is possible for us to make great strides rather quickly. Now, I don't know, it may be that we have to wait until masses of people die before we get that message. I'm not sure, but at least it sort of did happen.
And it's too expensive not to act before.
Indeed.
Yes, it is.
Oh heck, what was I going to say? Sorry about that, Mark.
That's
okay.
Your moment again.
It happens to all of us, Geoff.
Yeah. But what I was going to say is that when China shut down in early February, and then they went until mid-March and they started up industry again, it reassured me that the carbon dioxide measurements done at Mauna Loa in Hawaii are the right thing to look at, because the downturn in the carbon dioxide was actually obvious on the trace for a month. And I showed that on one of my Facebook pages at some stage a few months back. It was quite surprising. And then as soon as they picked up again in mid-March, off it went again.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like you said, Mark, COVID shows that we can change.
Yes.
We can.
And must change.
Who else have questions?
Oh, perhaps I could ask one here.
Yes.
Hi, it's Garth. Geoff,
Yes.
sorry, you just disappeared. Oh, there you are. I'm just wondering, Geoff, after you write your next novel, what is the book, any genre you'd like, but what is the book you'd most love to write if you had lots of time?
The next one. I've actually started it.
Yeah. Besides that one, I know you're on your way with the next one. But if you could write any book you wanted to, let's say, to have President Trump read, what would that book be?
Oh yeah. Well.
To win friends and influence
It's
people.
a book of short stories, and I'm going to fill in the distance between these two novels, the same family. I've written a couple already. Yeah. But the one after that, if I write it, I've given some thought to it. I gave some thought to it when I was writing the first one, and that is the sequel to Convenient Mistruths. What happens when things get really worse than we can imagine? And there you got to start thinking of not just the science and, you know, what's happening with climate impacts and that, but the social consequences, right? Particularly climate refugees and where they're going to go and all those things. So very worrisome. In fact, I think things are going to get out of control for NGOs that are trying to help in developing countries. I think eventually things may get out of control. They just can't keep up with it.
Yeah.
That's my thought. I may be wrong, but and I hope it's not that way. But PWRDF will keep going, won't they? Will.
Hey, we're waiting for the trilogy then.
Okay.
then, Geoff, I got to ask you a little bit about,
Sure.
I think people that might be watching after the fact will be curious too. You had never thought about being a writer before, you were a scientist. Tell us that moment that you thought, you know what, if I put this in a story, it might make a difference.
Well, it came, actually, that came to me back about 2006 when Al Gore brought out his Inconvenient Truth. And I thought, gee, I should write a novel and call it Convenient Mistruth, which is along the same lines. And for quite a few years, I didn't bother, almost 10 years before I actually started it. But that's what spurred me on, because I was looking for other ways, as I said, to provide public education on climate change. Because it was frustrating the hell out of me giving talks, especially when I was in Alberta, and there'd be a climate denialist or two planted in every audience where I spoke. And they'd come up with their nonsense. But usually I'd have one or two scientists that I knew of that were there, and they'd help me defend it. So they weren't really a problem. But it was very frustrating to see the public believing some of that stuff. You know, they were saying there's conspiracies, right? We're seeing that now with COVID and the pandemic.
Yeah.
People saying, no, it's all a plot by the governments and the medical profession all over the world and the World Health Organization. What a pile of nonsense, you know. Anyway.
So tomorrow or tonight, what would you like us all to go and do that will make a difference? What's a little step for all of us?
Well, start thinking of the ways that you can, you know, in your own way, or read the book. And,
Share the book.
Too.
Yeah.
Share the book.
to look at your own carbon footprint, or even broader than that, your ecological footprint. I can provide a good site to go to. You'd be shocked, each one of us, at just how high our ecological footprint is, and start thinking of ways to reduce it, because every little bit counts, right?
Do you want to share that site right now? Because I think that people will be interested.
Share which?
Share the site that you can send us to look at our own footprint.
Oh, I gotta look it up. If you can hang tough, well, I'll get it for you.
Oh, I've got lots, Jane.
You've got that
Yeah.
one already? Okay.
And if anyone has some questions and you want to think about that, we'll just take a couple more and finish up.
Yeah, go ahead while I'm looking for this. Ask.
Well, maybe one question when Geoff comes back, or for others.
I'm here.
Okay, you can hear it maybe, Geoff, but you know, sometimes we're just kind of encouraged as a response to all the hurts and the harms of climate. We just got to plant a lot more trees. Even Justin Trudeau has said, we just got to plant hundreds of thousands and millions of trees all around the world to suck up that carbon, and we'll be in a much better place. Is it as simple as just planting trees? I know a bit of the answer, but maybe Geoff, as a scientist, after you find the site there, you can talk a bit about that too.
Yeah, my usual answer to that is that all of those things can help.
Yeah.
But without first rapidly and significantly reducing carbon emissions, it will not help at all.
Mm-hmm.
That's my view on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But if you think about, you know, you could plant billions of trees.
Yeah.
But before the Industrial Revolution, we had a lot more trees here, but global warming still took hold when we start burning fossil fuels, right? So,
Yeah, good answer.
so there's a two-stage process: reduce emissions rapidly and significantly, and then we can look at those other things which would start sequestering carbon, what's up there already, out of the atmosphere. And there are a number of good ways you can do that. One organization, they list 82 ways we can get carbon out of the atmosphere. They think they can solve it by that, but I keep telling them, not without first reducing emissions. Okay.
We have a question from Mary Ellen. She's asked, is there any author you feel addresses the issue, Naomi Klein or David Suzuki?
Both of them are very good. Yeah.
And do you have others that you would recommend?
For readability, I guess David Suzuki, you know, but Naomi Klein wrote a very good book. I have it here somewhere. I don't see it. It might be on my bookshelf upstairs. I have 2 of her books, and yeah, they're very readable.
Okay.
If you get books from a climate scientist, they tend to be a little bit too technical and they get lost in that. But these people, David Suzuki has done a lot of good on that area. I'm quite impressed with that. Yeah.
The question mark, yeah.
Yeah, I just, one of the ones that, websites that I go often to get information out is called drawdown.org.
Yeah.
And it's got a lot of valuable information about not only what are the greatest things that we can do, the things that have the most effect, but it sort of is divided into projects that we could do or things that we could focus on. Many of them, of course, are on the industrial level.
Yeah.
But some of them are also.
They're a bit overstated. That's the organization I was talking about, and I keep telling them, without reducing emissions first, and that should be in their literature.
Yeah.
We're not going to be very successful.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought reducing emissions were involved in drawdown.
They don't specifically state it, I don't think, from what I've seen. I may be wrong, but anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Take a look.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think they sort of organize things in order. I'll go check on that anyway and let you know.
Good.
Okay.
Okay. And Geoff, I think we'll finish up. This has been really educational. And again, I admire the method that you're getting this message out there. So encourage all of us to share these stories, share your work, and get more people reading it. So it's a fantastic way to educate people.
I haven't even told you about my Bible study I use to get this message out. But anyway, I'll send that link to you. Could you put it on the website where you have the video later?
I think we can do that. Yes.
With a note there that this is a site where you can estimate your ecological footprint as well as your carbon footprint.
Yeah, I really want to do that.
Okay. Yeah, you'll be shocked.
I'm afraid that might be true.
I gave it as an assignment to my last class at VIU, where I had 30 students. Every single one of them, when they wrote up their assignments, that I was shocked, you know, in one form or another. That's what they wrote. They thought they were fairly conservative, but they weren't.
No. That's really good information. Another good step for us right away. And so thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us. We have Demi, I think, is going to come back on. There she is.
Yeah, hi. All right, so thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Janet and Geoff. Just before we go, I just wanted to share a couple library updates. Starting tomorrow, September 3rd, nearly 2,000 Canadian public libraries will be offering their patrons free, no-wait copies of Bad Ideas by Canadian author Missy Marston. You can access that ebook or e-audiobook from our website or using Libby on your mobile device from September 3rd to 17th. Read the book and participate in online discussions with other TNRD residents, and it will be hosted by staff from our library, and you can check our website for more information on that. Fall programming is also starting soon, and book clubs will be returning in September, so this month. Kids, teen, tech, and more adult programs will be returning in October, and registration for all programs will be opening at 10 a.m. on September 21st. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and thanks, Janet and Geoff. And as always, remember, you can reach out to the library if you have any questions, and hope everyone has a good night.
And thank you, Jamie and Janet.
Thank you.
All the people that participated and the ones who couldn't get on, but I hope they'll be able to see it. When will that be up on your Facebook page?
Hopefully we will get it up tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Thanks very much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If